It has been more than 10 years since I started to learn watercolor portraits, but as a self-taught artist, I had to learn a lot the hard way. Today I want to share 10 tips that will help you paint better watercolor portraits, avoid some of the common mistakes, and just as importantly, enjoy your process. Implementing these tips into my own portrait practice has been game-changing for me, and I hope they'll make a difference for you too. Let's start with the tips. One of the first upgrades that completely changed my portraits was switching to 100% cotton paper. I know that it's more expensive, but the difference is huge. On student grade paper, colors sink in, they look dull, and the surface can't handle many layers. On cotton paper, washes stay vibrant, you can glaze more confidently, and lifting or blending is much easier. So if you are serious about watercolor portraits, good paper is honestly more important than buying every color or the most expensive brushes. Cotton paper will make your portraits look more alive. The brand of paper also matters, at least to some extent. Even if you are using 100% cotton, each company kind of makes it a bit differently. Some papers can dry faster, some keep the surface wet longer. Even cold press textures can vary a lot. I use a couple of different brands and I always try to test new ones when I can, but right now my favorite is Winsor & Newton Professional. Tip number 2, keep some of the sketch lines visible. So I always start with the sketch and I'm not afraid to let some of those lines show in final portrait. I think they can add character and structure, and to me they're actually beautiful because they reveal the artist's thought process. The only thing that you need to watch out for is graphite smudging, which can make your work look muddy. You can solve this by sketching lightly. You can use a harder pencil if that's your style, but for me, the real game changer is my kneadable eraser. After I finish the drawing, I always go over it to lift the extra graphite, so the lines are still there but much softer. The key takeaway here is not to stress if some of your sketch lines show through. They can add a dynamic hand-painted feel. Your watercolor this way will stay fresh, transparent, and full of character. Tip number 3, work with a limited palette of colors. One of the best things that you can do for your portraits is to work with a very limited palette, sometimes even with just 3 colors. You probably heard this advice before, but did you actually try it? The impact on your painting practice can be enormous. You finally learn how to mix colors, your painting will look more harmonious, and my favorite part is way less overwhelmed when starting a new piece. So I used to have a palette of 24 colors and I kept buying more every time that I thought I needed a specific shade. And it got me stuck so many times I can't even count, not to mention the money that I wasted on tubes that I barely touched. I am not against treating yourself to a special color, especially if you know that you will use it often, but why overwhelm yourself before you even put down the first wash? For me, decision fatigue is a big problem. Let me know if you can relate. But since I simplified down to about 10 colors that are like a staple on my palette, getting started takes less than 5 minutes. That one change alone doubled how many paintings I finished compared to 2 years ago. And I love working in 3 color, 4 color, 5 color portraits because it teaches me so much about color interactions and the results feel more unified. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to film a real-time color mixing guide to help you build your own limited palette. I'd be happy to film that for you if that's something that would help. Tip number 4, let's use less layers to create a watercolor painting. When I first started, layering was the only watercolor technique that I knew. Thin wash after thin wash until the portrait slowly looked finished. And even today, a lot of professional artists work like this because the benefit is clear. You have a lot of control over the process. But for me personally, the downsides started to outweigh the positives. Every time I finished a painting, I was happy with the results, but also exhausted, and I wouldn't touch another piece for a week. Progress was painfully slow, and halfway through, I always struggled to judge if my values were right. The biggest issue, though, was losing that watercolor freshness, the very thing that excited me about this medium. Too many layers made this piece feel polished to the point of looking almost digital, and that's not the kind of art that I want to create. So I gave up chasing the flawless look and simplified my process. My goal now is 2 or 3 layers, sometimes a little more where I need it, but the key is mixing both thin washes with a thicker paint. My first layer is always watery and splashy, and then I go in with thicker, darker paint to establish the midtones and shadows. If you'd like to see my shading process in detail, I actually made an entire video about it and I will link it down below for you. This change was a real turning point. I do not overwork the paper nearly as often as before and my colors stay vibrant. Also, I can't stress enough how much time this saves. It is significant, and for me, time is the most valuable resource. But even if you have plenty of time for watercolor practice, remember that in the beginning we learn the most through quantity. Painting 3 portraits in a week instead of 1 will push your progress so much faster. One of the easiest ways that you can breathe life into your watercolor portrait is to let some of your brushstrokes stay loose and expressive. They do not have to be all perfectly blended. A few bold, visible strokes in the hair or the background can instantly make the whole portrait feel more dynamic. I think it was Joseph Zbukvic, one of my favorite watercolor artists, who said, "If you don't tell a story, you're just making a picture." And that really stuck with me because loose strokes help tell that story. They guide the viewer's eye and make the painting feel alive. Think of them as the body language of your painting. They don't just describe form, they can communicate emotion, energy, and atmosphere. They invite the viewer to imagine more than what is literally painted on the page. And here's a tip inside the tip. Experiment with different brushes. Large brushes might feel uncomfortable at first, but they're key for those big, confident strokes in the early stages. I also love playing with unusual brush shapes because they can give you strokes you'd never think to make on your own. Tip number 6, add context early on, which means judge your values in relations to the background. So one of the biggest mistakes that I made for many years was shading the face on white paper and only adding the background and stylization at the very end. The problem was you can't really judge how light or dark something is until you see it in the relation to the background. I can't tell you how many times I thought the portrait looked fine and then I added the background and then I realized that the whole balance was off. The shadows looked too weak or too harsh and I had to rework them all over again. So these days my first layer always includes not just the skin tones but also basic wash for the hair and the background in a single pass. I know that it feels scary to add that much color so early, but it instantly gives you context. Suddenly the highlights look brighter, the shadows fall into place naturally. I even like to pull some of the background color into the face shadows. It ties everything together beautifully. When we are learning, it's so normal to tiptoe around the piece and move slowly, but just once try laying down all your major colors side by side before you start shading. I promise that it will make a big difference. The next tip is pretty technical, but I wouldn't mention it if it didn't completely change the way my portraits look now. The color that you use for the shadows matters more than you think. For years I used Payne's gray or neutral tint, and while they gave me dark values, the portraits often felt heavy and a little lifeless. The real breakthrough was switching to lighter, more transparent pigments for shadows. Cobalt blue, for example, is a cool color but also naturally mid-value. Even when you use a thick paint from a tube mixed into a skin tone base, it creates shadows that look lively and believable instead of muddy. But cobalt blue is just one option. You can also push your shadows a little more purple or experiment with greens. What all of these have in common is that they aren't straight from the tube darks. Choosing a mid-value pigments help prevent those flat, grayish shadows, and it gives your portraits depth and atmosphere without weighing them down. Okay, tip number 8, embrace the imperfections of watercolor. When people talk about watercolor, it's usually about control. How to control edges, how to control water, how to control color. But not controlling watercolor is the hardest thing of all. I've been teaching classes for 8 years and I have seen so many emotional outbursts from students because a bloom appeared in the wrong spot or a splash landed 3 centimeters away. And I get it, I was not different in the beginning. Over time though, I started to notice something. The paintings that took my breath away were never the perfectly controlled ones, not even my own. I'm not being narcissistic here. I'm talking about the watercolor artists that I admire. The ones that really stick with me are expressive, with splashy splatters and unexpected textures. And it's not just that they look cool, they kind of keep me engaged. If your process is predictable from start to finish, where's the challenge? Every painting should have a little bit of the problem for you to solve. Not too much so that you don't give up, but just enough that it keeps you curious. Instead of trying to make watercolor into something that it's not, let's embrace it for what it does best: movement, spontaneity, and atmosphere. Of course, there are parts of portrait where you want more control and detail, and there is a way to do that in watercolor, but let's not cover the entire page with them. Details alone cannot create atmosphere, but watercolor, left a little wild, can absolutely do that. Tip number 9. Don't chase the photo, tell your story. For years, I believed that the closer my portraits looked to a photo, the better they were. I spent ages learning to reproduce with paint what a phone captures in a second, and I did get close on some pieces. Then a few clients visited my studio and said, "We love your work, but we would not hang a stranger's portrait in our home." That landed pretty cold. I realized that I'd been painting facts about someone's face instead of telling how I feel. Technique is very powerful, but once that you've built it, you have to let it go a little. Just ask yourself, why this particular portrait? What do I feel? And why do I want to paint it? What do I want viewers to feel? And then you can emphasize what really matters to what you want to create and abandon anything that doesn't, like every pore, every single hair strand. We often get caught up trying to over-explain visually. That's why I do not like showing reference photos in my videos, not even if you asked me for them, because I use them as a guide. Often I stop looking halfway through. Do I lose some likeness? Sure, but it is really a downside. The portrait that I'm painting in this video, called Inner Child, is a perfect example. Switching from realistic strangers to this piece instantly pulled me out of an art block and back into inspiration. I do think that even commissions where likeness matters are stronger when you add personality rather than just hand painting a photo. A portrait is not only anatomy and light, it's character, story, and how a person makes you feel. But here's the other side of the coin. A friend of mine, an incredible watercolor artist, I recently hosted for a workshop in my studio, said something that changed how I see this. I told him, I want to lose the details so badly, they ruin my paintings, and learning them feels like a waste of time. The way he paints is very loose, expressive, and I just adore his paintings. But he said, you know, you first have to learn how to make them in order to loosen up. How else would you know which parts to keep to hold the painting together? That was such an enlightening moment. The way we grow as artists, from struggling to learning details to maybe letting them go again, it is not wasted time. It is a healthy process. I just think that we should paint with a bit more consciousness. We have to talk about this. We have to ask ourselves not just what we're painting, but why. And that's when our work can transform. The last tip is the biggest one of them all. One of the hardest things for me and for so many beginner artists is putting way too much weight on a single painting. If it doesn't turn out the way that we hope, we make it as proof that we don't have talent or that painting just is not for us. It's really heartbreaking how many exceptional people give up their passion because of wrong perception of how skill actually develops. Progress in watercolor portraits depends on many factors, but one of the biggest one is simply quantity. That doesn't mean that you need to rush a piece or being careless. Of course that you should focus and do your best, but if it takes you 4 days to complete a small painting and then another week to recover emotionally because it didn't come quite right, you will lose motivation very fast. So simplify everything that you can. Keep a small space ready with only the essentials. Use fewer materials, keep your approach straight to the point. Paint for 2 or 3 hours, finish, and then move on to the next one. And then the next one. Show your work to others, go to workshops, connect with other people that paint and compare notes. Learn together. Because that is where the growth happens. That one painting that you made and that did not work out does not define you, my friend. It's the collection of all of those portraits over time that shapes your style, your confidence, and your joy in the process. You've got this. I love talking to you today, and if I can ask one favor, it is this. Please leave me a comment letting me know which tip was most useful to you and whether this video helped you in any way. And if it did, please support me by giving it a like. Your visible feedback really makes it possible for me to keep creating more videos like this. If you'd like to dive deeper into watercolor portrait techniques, here is another video that takes you through the process step by step. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.